Hey there, night travelers. It's late, I know. You're probably already nestled under your own covers, maybe scrolling through your phone with one eye half closed. But tonight, I'm taking you somewhere that'll make you grateful for that thermostat on your wall. We're stepping into a medieval castle in the dead of February, where the stone walls weep with condensation. Your breath ghosts white in the air, even indoors, and the wind howling through the arrow slits sounds like something alive and hungry. You're a knight now, or maybe a squire, or a man-at-arms, and the sun went down 2 hours ago, which means you've got roughly 12 hours of darkness ahead of you in a building that was designed to keep enemies out, not warmth in. Good thing this isn't your life, because spoiler alert, you're going to spend most of tonight wondering if your toes will ever feel warm again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the heavy oak door to the great hall, and the cold hits you like a physical thing. Not the clean, crisp cold of winter mornings, but something older, something that's been gathering in these stones since the castle was built 3 generations ago. The door groans shut behind you, its iron hinges protesting, and you're standing in what passes for the warmest room in the entire fortress. There's a fire blazing in the central hearth, yes, a proper bonfire really, logs as thick as your thigh sending flames 6 feet into the air. But here's the thing about medieval great halls that nobody tells you. The heat goes straight up. It rises through the rafters, mingles with the smoke, and escapes through the louvers in the roof, taking all its warmth with it, like an inconsiderate houseguest. What's left for you, standing 15 feet from the flames, is a vague suggestion of heat and a lot of smoke that stings your eyes. The hall is already filling with bodies. It's barely past Compline, the final prayer service of the day, and everyone who lives or serves in this castle is claiming their sleeping spot for the night. You count maybe 40 people scattered across the rush-covered floor, knights like yourself, men-at-arms, squires, pages, serving boys, a few craftsmen who live within the walls. The Great Hall isn't just a dining room or a ceremonial space. At night, it transforms into the world's least comfortable hostel, where everyone from the garrison sleeps side by side, separated only by social rank and how close you can get to the fire without singeing your eyebrows. You watch as 2 older knights claim the benches nearest the hearth. That's prime real estate right there, and they've earned it through years of service. They'll sleep sitting up, backs against the wall, maybe dozing off and waking a dozen times as the fire dies and the cold creeps closer. The benches themselves are worn smooth by decades of bodies, and you know from experience that by morning there'll be grooves pressed into their backs from the wood grain. It's not comfortable, but it's better than what most people here will get. Speaking of which, you notice the squires are spreading themselves across the trestle tables, the long dining boards that haven't been cleared away yet. They're young, most of them between 12 and 16, and they're making jokes about who snores loudest, who'll fall off in the middle of the night, but you can see them shivering already, pulling their woolen cloaks tighter. The tables are hard, but at least they're off the floor, away from the drafts that snake along the ground like invisible serpents seeking warmth to devour. Your own spot is predetermined by your rank and relationship to the lord of the castle. You're not important enough for a bench, not young enough to claim a table without looking ridiculous. So you head toward the section of floor between the hearth and the far wall, where the other household knights are arranging themselves. The floor here is covered in rushes, dried grasses and herbs that are supposed to provide cushioning and pleasant smells. In theory, they're changed regularly. In practice, you're fairly certain these particular rushes have been here since autumn, and they've absorbed every spilled drink, every tracked-in mud, every dropped morsel of food from the past 4 months. When you kneel down, they crunch beneath your weight, releasing a smell that's part lavender, part mildew, part mystery. Here's something historians still argue about. Just how cold did these halls actually get? Some scholars point to the massive fires and claim the halls stayed reasonably warm, at least near the hearth. Others note that in really severe winters, water in buckets could freeze solid overnight, even indoors, and wine would ice over in its cups. The truth probably depends on the castle, the severity of the winter, and how well maintained the structure was. But standing here now, feeling the draft from the door slits under the main entrance, watching your breath fog in the air despite that roaring fire, you're pretty confident that freezing your medieval backside off is the accurate technical term. You start preparing your sleeping area, which is a generous term for the section of floor you're defending from other people. First, you spread your cloak, the heavy woolen one you wear during the day, now doing double duty as a ground cover. Then you pull from your pack a blanket you've been carrying, a coarse woolen thing that's seen better decades. Some of the other knights have 2 blankets, even 3. One lucky soul, Sir Geoffrey, who married well, has a fur coverlet that he's spreading with obvious satisfaction, making sure everyone sees it. You make a mental note to possibly befriend Geoffrey before next winter, or at least stand near him at social gatherings. The thing about wool is that it works when it's damp, which is good, because everything in this castle is always at least slightly damp. The stones sweat condensation, the air carries moisture from the kitchens and the moat, and the bodies of 40 people breathing in close quarters. Your blanket probably hasn't been fully dry since October, but wool, wonderful, scratchy, slightly greasy wool, retains heat even when wet, unlike linen or cotton. Thank God for sheep, honestly. Where would medieval people be without sheep? Probably dead of hypothermia by age 30, that's where. Around you, the evening routine continues. Someone's feeding the fire, though it's already enormous. The castle's marshal is making his rounds, checking that everyone's accounted for, that no one's sleeping in a doorway where they'll block emergency exit. The dogs, there are always dogs in a medieval great hall, are finding their own sleeping spots, curling against their preferred humans or in groups near the hearth. One large hunting hound stretches out next to you, and you don't shoo it away. That's extra warmth right there, and you're not too proud to share body heat with a dog. The dog probably isn't too impressed with you either, but here you both are, equally desperate for warmth, in a building that seems designed to cultivate cold. The narrow windows high on the walls are shuttered now, covered with wooden panels that do a mediocre job of blocking the wind. In summer, those windows would have oiled linen stretched across them, letting in filtered light. But in winter, it's all wood and darkness, and the assumption that you don't really need to see anything anyway. There's a little light from the fire, a little more from a few tallow candles burning in sconces on the walls. But mostly, the hall is a landscape of shadows and orange, flickering shapes. You lie down on your makeshift bed, pulling your cloak and blanket around you, and immediately understand that sleep is going to be aspirational tonight. Your back is against the stones of the floor, and even through the rushes in your cloak, you can feel how cold they are. It's like lying on a slab in a crypt, which, given that some castles were literally built over burial chambers, isn't as metaphorical as you'd like. But let's talk about these walls for a moment, because they're the reason you're here and the reason you're freezing. And understanding them helps explain why medieval knights spent so many winter nights questioning their life choices. The walls of this castle are roughly 5 meters thick at the base. That's about 16 feet of solid stone, lime mortar, and rubble fill. They were built that way for military reasons, to withstand siege engines, to absorb the impact of battering rams, to make tunneling underneath them a project that would take months. In summer, this massive thermal mass stays cool, keeping the interior relatively pleasant while the outside world bakes. In winter, it does the exact opposite, acting like a giant stone refrigerator that preserves the cold from November through March. You shift position, trying to find a spot where a rock isn't digging into your shoulder blade, and your hand brushes against the wall behind you. It's wet. Not dripping wet, but definitely damp, covered in a fine sheen of condensation. Run your fingertips along the surface, and you can feel the moisture collecting in the tiny pits and irregularities in the stone. In the coldest weeks, you've seen frost patterns form on interior walls, delicate ice crystals spreading across the surface like some kind of winter artwork. It's beautiful and deeply, deeply inconvenient. Above you, the ceiling disappears into darkness and smoke. This great hall is open to the rafters, rough-hewn oak beams as thick as wine barrels, darkened by years of smoke, festooned with cobwebs that the castle staff has long since given up trying to remove. The height is impressive, maybe 30 feet from floor to the highest point of the roof. That vertical space is filled with rising heat, wood smoke, and wasted potential for keeping anyone warm. Some castles, the really fancy ones, or ones built later in the medieval period, have timber ceilings installed below the rafters, creating a smaller, more heatable space. This castle does not have that feature, because apparently the lord who commissioned it 3 generations ago believed that impressive architecture was more important than thermal comfort. His descendants, shivering in this hall every winter, probably have opinions about his priorities. The windows are the other major culprit in your current discomfort. They're narrow, arrow slits really, designed so defenders can shoot out while attackers can't easily shoot in. They're positioned high on the walls for the same reason, and while they're shuttered now, the wooden shutters don't seal perfectly. Wind finds the gaps, whistles through them, creates drafts that snake through the hall like invisible rivers of cold. You can hear it right now. A low, persistent whistle from the north wall, a separate moaning sound from the west. Each window sings its own song of winter, and together they create a symphony of discomfort. There's a quirky bit of castle design that sometimes helped. Some later medieval castles had small chambers built into the thickness of the walls, with their own tiny fireplaces. These mural chambers were cozy spaces where a single person or couple could actually get warm. But those were luxuries for the lord and his family, not for knights sleeping in the hall. You get to admire the architectural innovation from a distance while you shiver in your wool blanket cocoon. Somewhere in the darkness, you hear the click of claws on stone. One of the dogs relocating, probably moving closer to the fire now that the initial chaos of everyone settling in has calmed. There's wisdom in dogs. They know that the best time to claim prime sleeping spots is after the humans have sorted themselves out. You briefly consider relocating yourself, moving closer to the hearth, but the spots there are taken by knights with more seniority, and you're too tired to start a territorial dispute. Besides, you've got a secret weapon waiting for you, a bit of medieval sleep technology that's going to make the next few hours more bearable. You just need to wait a little longer, until the right moment in the evening routine, before you can deploy it. For now, you lie still, feeling the cold of the stones beneath you, the dampness in the air, the weight of the wool blanket that's somehow both too heavy and not nearly enough. Around you, others are settling in. The noise level is dropping as conversations fade into drowsy murmurs. You hear someone coughing, a wet, persistent cough that echoes off the stone. Someone else is snoring already, which seems like a superpower you'd very much like to possess right now. The fire is still crackling, but you can tell it's starting to die down. The night watchman will keep it going, feeding it logs through the night, but it'll never be as large or as hot as it was right after dinner. As the hours pass and the cold deepens, that fire will shrink and the cold will advance, like an occupying army, claiming territory foot by foot, until even the people nearest the hearth are huddled under every blanket they own. You pull your blanket tighter and tuck your hands under your armpits, a position you'll maintain on and off for most of the night. Your feet are still in your leather boots because taking them off would be insane. Those boots are your first line of defense against frostbite, and besides, the thought of putting cold leather back on in the morning is too terrible to contemplate. Better to just leave them on, accept that your feet will be somewhat compressed and uncomfortable, and deal with it. The thing about sleeping in boots is that your feet sweat, even in cold weather, and that moisture has nowhere to go. By morning, your feet will be damp, your boots will smell impressive, and you'll understand why medieval people had such spectacular foot problems. But that's morning's problem. Right now, you're just trying to make it through the night without losing feeling in your extremities. After perhaps an hour of lying on the cold floor, trying to convince your body that this counts as rest, you finally give up and sit up. Your back is protesting, your shoulder has a fresh bruise from a poorly placed rock in the floor, and you can no longer feel 3 of your toes. Time to do something about the sleeping situation, because clearly just wrapping yourself in wool and hoping for the best isn't going to cut it. You stand, careful not to step on the night sleeping 2 feet to your left, and make your way toward your actual bed. Yes, you have a bed. Most of the household nights do, though the term bed is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. What you actually have is a simple wooden frame, 4 posts, maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, with ropes woven between them in a grid pattern. These ropes are what support your mattress, and they need to be tightened regularly, which is where the phrase "sleep tight" allegedly comes from, though historians still debate that etymology over wine at academic conferences. The bed frame is set against the far wall, one of 6 similar frames lined up like soldiers on parade. During the day, the beds can be curtained off for privacy, but at night, those curtains come down because fabric is valuable, and also because everyone's sleeping in the hall anyway, so privacy is a meaningless concept. Your mattress is already on the frame. You didn't bother moving it because why would you? It's a canvas tick, basically a large bag made of sturdy cloth, stuffed with straw. Here's where we need to pause and talk about medieval mattresses, because they're not what you're imagining. That straw stuffing, it's not nice, clean, golden wheat stalks arranged neatly like something from a farm photography exhibition. It's old straw, broken stalks, dried grass, possibly some hay, all compressed and poking through the canvas in approximately 7,000 places. When you lie down on a straw mattress, you become intimately familiar with every sharp end, every piece that's worked its way through the weave of the canvas. The servants at this castle, and there's a whole hierarchy of servants, from the trusted household staff down to the boys who scrub pots, they're lucky if they have a canvas cover for their straw at all. Most of them sleep on loose straw, which means they spend their nights with stalks pricking their hardened hides, as one medieval account politely puts it. But you're a knight, a member of the household, so you get the canvas tick. And more importantly, you get what's on top of it, a feather bed. This is the medieval equivalent of a luxury purchase, the thing you might save up for years to afford or receive as a generous gift from a grateful lord. It's another cloth bag. This one's stuffed not with straw, but with feathers. Goose down if you're lucky, chicken feathers if you're not, possibly a mixture of both if whoever stuffed it was economical. The feather bed is maybe 4 inches thick when fully fluffed, which it currently is not, because it's been compressed by your body weight every night for the past 2 months. You grab it and give it a good shake, which releases a small cloud of dust and a single feather that drifts away into the darkness. The feather bed puffs up slightly, returning to maybe 3 inches of thickness. Not ideal, but it'll do. You spread it back on top of the straw tick, smoothing it out, making sure it covers the worst of the pokey spots. Now comes the sheet situation. You have exactly 2 sheets, both made of linen, both woven by someone's grandmother at some point in the past decade. Linen sheets are what separate humans from animals, according to medieval thinking. Even people sleeping on straw are supposed to have a linen sheet between them and the straw, a thin barrier between civilized humanity and the agricultural products they're using as beds. Your sheets are rough. Linen has to be washed many times before it softens, and they're darned in several places where they've worn through. One has a stain that you've given up trying to explain or remove. But they're clean, or at least they were clean 2 weeks ago when you last managed to get them laundered, and they're yours. You spread the bottom sheet over the feather bed, tucking it around the edges as best you can. The top sheet goes over you, obviously, but you're not getting under it yet. There's still work to do. On top of the sheets, you have blankets. 3 of them, in fact, which makes you relatively wealthy in the currency of medieval comfort. 2 are wool, that scratchy, slightly greasy wool that every medieval person knows intimately. The 3rd is a coverlet made of wool on one side and lined with rabbit fur on the other. It's your most prized possession, a gift from your father when you earned your knighthood, and you guard it jealously. The fur side goes against your body, the wool side faces out, and the warmth it provides is approximately equal to the body heat of 2 additional humans. But here's the thing. Even with all this, the feather bed, the linen sheets, the 3 blankets, the fur coverlet, you're still going to be cold, because all of this bedding is designed to trap body heat, and your body, unfortunately, is not currently producing enough heat to warm anything. You're already chilled from lying on the cold floor. Your core temperature has dropped, and climbing into a cold bed is just going to make you shiver for the next hour, while you slowly warm the space between the sheets. This is why you need the secret weapon. This is why you've been waiting. You head back to the hearth, where the fire has burned down to a more manageable size. The night watchman nods at you. He knows what you're doing. Everyone does this. And you use a long iron poker to roll a stone out of the fire pit. Not just any stone. This is a specific rounded river rock, about the size of a small melon, that you placed near the edge of the fire 2 hours ago, specifically for this purpose. It's been sitting in the coals, absorbing heat, turning itself into a medieval hot water bottle. The stone is now hot enough to glow slightly in the darkness, radiating heat like a tiny sun. You can't touch it directly, obviously, unless you want blisters that'll keep you out of sword practice for a week. Instead, you wrap it carefully in several layers of cloth, an old shirt that's too worn to wear, wrapped around several times, tied securely with twine. The wrapped stone is still hot, almost uncomfortably so, but the cloth prevents burning. You carry your precious cargo back to your bed, walking carefully because dropping a heated stone on your foot would be both painful and embarrassing. Other knights are doing the same thing, moving between hearth and bed with their own wrapped stones, a parade of medieval warming technology. The servants, notably, are not doing this. They don't have beds to warm, and stones from the fire are allocated by rank. But they huddle closer to each other, creating warmth through proximity, and honestly, they might have the right idea. You place the wrapped stone at the foot of your bed, tucked between the sheets, and immediately feel the warmth radiating outward. It's not much, but it's enough to pre-warm the coldest part of the bed, the place where your perpetually frozen feet will soon rest. In a few hours, the stone will cool, becoming just another cold lump in your bed. But by then, hopefully, you'll be asleep and won't notice. Now, finally, you can actually get into bed. You sit on the edge of the mattress, and immediately the straw beneath the canvas crunches and shifts. The feather bed compresses, and you feel at least 3 stalks poke through and jab you in unfortunate places. This is normal. This is every night. You've made peace with it, mostly. But before you lie down, there's the question of what you're wearing to bed. And this is where medieval sleeping arrangements get interesting, because the answer depends on your social status, the temperature, and whether you own dedicated sleepwear, which most people absolutely did not. Right now, you're wearing your daily clothes, a linen shirt, wool hose, basically medieval tights, a woolen tunic that falls to mid-thigh, and over that, a heavier woolen surcoat. You've already removed your leather boots. Yes, you finally took them off, because sleeping in your bed with boots on is a bridge too far even for you. Your feet immediately protest the cold, curling into themselves like offended cats. This is why the heated stone was necessary. Here's something that would surprise most modern people. The majority of medieval folks slept naked. Not because they were particularly comfortable or liberated, but because clothing was expensive, really expensive. A single woolen tunic might cost several days' wages for a laborer. You didn't wear out your good clothes by sleeping in them, getting them sweaty and compressed and potentially torn. If you owned 2 outfits, you wore one during the day and carefully preserved the other. Sleeping naked meant your clothes would last longer, but naked sleeping in a medieval castle in winter is basically asking for hypothermia, so modifications were made. Many people slept in their undershirts, the linen shift that went under your main clothing. Linen against the skin, wool on top during the day, that was the rule. At night, you might strip down to just that linen shift, climb under your blankets and hope for the best. Wealthy people, especially by the late 1400s, might own actual nightshirts or nightgowns, dedicated sleeping garments that were slightly longer and looser than day wear. But those were luxury items, the medieval equivalent of silk pajamas. You, being a practical knight who is currently freezing, compromise. You remove your surcoat and your tunic because sleeping in full day clothes gets uncomfortable fast. But you keep on your linen shirt and your hose because removing them would require more exposure to the cold air than you're willing to endure. So you're sleeping in essentially your medieval underwear, which is warmer than being naked, but cooler than being fully dressed. It's not ideal, but nothing about this situation is ideal. One thing you definitely keep on, your cap. Everyone in the medieval period slept with head coverings, and for good reason. A huge amount of body heat escapes through your head, and in a cold castle, keeping your head warm is the difference between sleeping and lying awake shivering all night. Your cap is wool, knitted by someone's wife, and it pulls down to cover your ears. It's slightly itchy, and you probably look ridiculous, but you look ridiculous and warm, which is the important part. Women, you know, have an even more elaborate nighttime routine. They braid their hair, wrap their heads in linen or wool covers, sometimes multiple layers. Long hair loses heat even faster than bare heads, and managing it while sleeping is a whole production. But that's their concern, not yours. Your hair is short, practical for wearing a helmet, and the cap handles it fine. You finally slide into bed, pulling the sheets and blankets up over yourself, and the cold is immediate and shocking. The linen sheet against your skin feels like ice, despite the heated stone somewhere down near your feet. This is the worst part of the night. The first 10 minutes in bed, when everything is cold, when you're shivering so hard your teeth chatter, when you genuinely wonder if you'll ever feel warm again. You lie very still, trying not to move, because movement brings cold air into the cocoon you're creating under the blankets. Your breathing is shallow. Deeper breaths would cool your core even more. You're essentially trying to hibernate, to reduce your body's functions to the minimum necessary for survival, while waiting for your own body heat to slowly, painfully slowly, warm the space around you. Around the hall you hear similar struggles. Someone's shivering so hard their bed frame is creaking rhythmically. Someone else has given up and gotten back out of bed, probably to grab another blanket or move closer to the fire. One of the squires is crying quietly, probably his first winter in the castle, not yet accustomed to just how cold it gets. An older knight calls out something reassuring. You can't hear the words, but the tone is gentle. We've all been there, the tone says. You survive it. Your toes have found the heated stone, and oh, blessed relief, there's actual warmth down there. You press your feet against it, careful not to burn yourself through the cloth wrapping, and feel the heat radiating into your frozen extremities. It's not enough to warm your whole body, but it's something. It's a small victory against the cold. You tuck your hands under the blankets, pull your knees toward your chest, curl into yourself like a hibernating animal. This position reduces your surface area, conserves heat, and is also deeply uncomfortable for your back, which will complain loudly tomorrow morning. But tomorrow morning is hours away. Right now, all that matters is getting through the night. The fur coverlet pressed against you starts to warm slightly. Your breath, trapped under the blankets, adds moisture and warmth to the air around your face. Very, very gradually, the shivering subsides. Your body, efficient machine that it is starting to win the battle against the cold. The space under the blankets is becoming bearable, then almost comfortable. Then, dare you think it, actually warm. This is when sleep becomes possible. This is the moment you've been waiting for, when the cold stops being an emergency and becomes merely a background discomfort. Your muscles relax, your breathing deepens. The sounds of the hall, crackling fire, distant wind, the breathing and shifting of 40 other people, fade into a kind of white noise. You're not comfortable, exactly. The straw is still poking you. Your back is twisted at an odd angle. One foot is developing a cramp. But you're warm enough and tired enough, and that's all that matters. Sleep, when it finally comes, feels like falling. You wake sometime later. It's impossible to know how long you've been asleep. Maybe an hour, maybe 3, and you're shivering again. The heated stone at your feet has gone cold, just another lump under the sheets, all its warmth dissipated into the air. The fire in the hearth has died down to glowing embers, providing almost no heat to the hall, and the cold, patient and persistent, has found its way under your blankets, creeping in through gaps and seams, stealing the warmth you worked so hard to create. This is the pattern of medieval winter nights. Sleep for a while, wake cold, struggle to warm up again, drift back to sleep, repeat until dawn. No one sleeps through the night in one unbroken stretch. That's a luxury of modern heating and insulation. Here, sleep is fragmented, interrupted, more like a series of naps than proper rest. You curl tighter into yourself, pulling the blankets up over your nose so that only your eyes are exposed. Your breath, trapped under the wool, warms your face slightly, but also dampens the fabric, which will eventually make it colder. It's a losing game, but you play it anyway, because what else can you do? Around you, the hall is a landscape of restless sleep. Someone is snoring, a deep, rattling sound that echoes off the stone walls. Someone else is coughing, that same wet cough from earlier, probably getting worse in the cold, damp air. Respiratory infections are common in winter, spreading quickly through the close quarters of the hall, and you make a mental note to try to stay upwind of that person tomorrow. One of the squires gets up, picking his way carefully across the sleeping bodies toward the garderobe, the medieval toilet, basically a shaft built into the castle wall that drops straight down to the moat below. It's freezing, private only in the darkest sense, and the draft coming up from the shaft is legendary. You hear his footsteps receding, then returning a few minutes later. He's probably colder now than when he woke up, poor kid. You shift position, trying to find a spot where the straw isn't jabbing you quite so aggressively. Your shoulder has gone numb from lying on it, and your hip is protesting the hard surface beneath the thin padding. You wonder, not for the first time, about the people who actually study this stuff. The historians who write about medieval daily life with such precision and detail. How do they know what they know? From household accounts, mostly. From wills that itemize bedding. From the occasional letter that mentions, in passing, how cold the castle is. There's debate among scholars about whether castles were truly as uncomfortable as they're made out to be. Some argue that medieval people were simply more accustomed to cold, that their bodies adapted to temperatures that would seem unbearable to modern humans. Others point out that medieval people complained about the cold constantly in their letters and diaries, that respiratory illnesses were rampant, that people literally wore all their clothes at once and still froze. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Yes, it was cold, and yes, people adapted, but no, that doesn't mean they enjoyed it. You can see in the dim red glow of the embers that the night watchman has fallen asleep in his chair near the fire. Technically, he's supposed to stay awake, feeding the fire, watching for emergencies. In practice, everyone knows that staying awake all night in a warm chair next to a dying fire is basically impossible. The marshal will probably wake him in an hour or so, remind him to add logs, and the cycle will continue. The fire situation is actually carefully managed. Wood isn't infinite, especially in winter when most of the estate's timber has already been cut and stored. A castle this size might go through several cords of wood a day, just keeping the essential fires burning. The great hall, the kitchens, the lord's chambers. Smaller fires in other rooms are a luxury, used only when necessary. So the hall fire is kept burning, but not roaring. Just enough to keep the worst of the cold at bay, to prevent actual freezing, to maintain a temperature that hovers somewhere between uncomfortable and dangerous. You try to go back to sleep, closing your eyes, breathing slowly, willing your body to relax. But your mind is awake now, running through tomorrow's tasks. Sword practice in the courtyard, assuming it's not actively snowing. Duties in the hall. Maybe a hunting party if the weather breaks. Your stomach rumbles quietly, reminding you that dinner was hours ago and breakfast is still hours away. Medieval mealtimes were different from modern ones. 2 meals a day was standard, dinner around noon, supper in early evening. That means from roughly 6 in the evening until noon the next day, you're not eating. Your body is used to it. Everyone's body is used to it. But on cold nights, when your body is burning calories just trying to stay warm, hunger is a constant companion. You hear voices from the other end of the hall. 2 knights who've apparently given up on sleep and are having a quiet conversation. You can't make out the words, but the tone is companionable. The way people talk when they're both awake at an unreasonable hour and figure they might as well have company in their misery. It's oddly comforting, knowing you're not the only one struggling with the cold. The dog that was sleeping nearby has moved, seeking warmth closer to the fire. Smart dog. You briefly consider getting up yourself, moving closer to the embers, but the thought of leaving your slightly warmed bed to walk across the freezing floor is too terrible to contemplate. Better to stay here, preserve what warmth you have, and hope sleep returns soon. Your feet have gone numb again. You flex your toes experimentally under the blankets, trying to restore circulation. The movement brings cold air into your cocoon, and you curse quietly. Not too loud, because that would be rude to the people trying to sleep, but with feeling. This is miserable. Tomorrow night you're getting 2 heated stones, you promise yourself. Maybe 3. Maybe you'll just sleep next to the fire and risk getting kicked by someone heading to the garderobe. Eventually, somehow, exhaustion wins over discomfort. Your breathing slows, your thoughts drift. Sleep returns, shallow and fitful, more like unconsciousness than true rest. But it's something, it's enough, and in a few more hours dawn will come, bringing with it the promise of movement, of activity, of breakfast, and the chance to feel your fingers and toes again. For now, you sleep, or something like it. The hierarchy of sleeping arrangements in a medieval castle is fascinating once you start noticing it. And now that you're awake again, it must be well past midnight, though there's no way to know for sure. You have plenty of time to observe. From your bed against the wall, you can see most of the great hall. The knights on the benches nearest the fire are the highest ranking, the ones with years of service, the ones trusted by the Lord. They're sleeping sitting up, which looks uncomfortable but keeps them close to the precious warmth. Just beyond them are the men-at-arms, professional soldiers who form the castle's garrison. They're on the floor, wrapped in cloaks, clustered together for warmth in a way that knights, with their beds and blankets, don't need to do. The squires are still on the tables, or at least most of them are. A few have migrated to the floor, having apparently discovered that falling off a table 3 times in one night makes sleeping on the ground look appealing. They're young enough to recover quickly from discomfort, but old enough to complain about it, and you can hear the occasional grumble from their corner of the hall. The pages, boys between 7 and 14, training to become squires, have claimed a spot near the kitchen entrance, where residual warmth from the ovens provides a slight advantage over the rest of the hall. It's not much, but when you're a kid sleeping on the floor in nothing but your shirt and a single blanket, any advantage matters. They're piled together like puppies, generating collective warmth, and honestly, they probably have the right idea. The servants are even further down the hierarchy, sleeping in the passageways and side rooms, anywhere they can find space. The lucky ones have straw pallets. The unlucky ones have the floor and whatever they can scavenge for covering. Medieval society was nothing if not stratified, and those class divisions are never clearer than at night, when the quality of your sleep depends directly on your social position. But here's the interesting part. No matter where you sleep in the castle, it's still the Great Hall or its adjacent spaces. Everyone sleeps together in communal spaces with minimal privacy. The idea of everyone having their own bedroom wouldn't become common for centuries. Even wealthy merchants might share a room with their entire family, servants and apprentices. Privacy wasn't really a concept the medieval mind prioritized. Security, warmth and community mattered more. The one exception, of course, is the lord of the castle and his family. They're not here in the hall with you. They're upstairs, or possibly in a separate building, depending on the castle's layout, in a sola, a private chamber that represents the height of medieval domestic luxury. The sola is usually on an upper floor, which means it's harder to defend but easier to heat. It's smaller than the Great Hall, which helps. Less space to warm means the fireplace there actually makes a difference. The Lord's sola probably has a proper chimney, a technological innovation that didn't become common until the 12th century. That chimney draws smoke up and out, instead of letting it pool in the rafters, which means the room is warmer and less smoky. Already, we're in luxury territory. The lord and lady sleep in an actual bed, not just a frame with ropes and a straw tick, but a proper wooden bed with a headboard and footboard, possibly with posts at each corner supporting a canopy. That canopy isn't just decorative, it's functional. Thick fabric hangs from the frame, creating a smaller enclosed space around the bed. Think of it as a tent inside a room inside a castle, each layer providing more insulation. With the curtains drawn, the canopy bed creates a microclimate, trapping body heat and the warmth from the fire, creating a space that might actually be comfortable. The bed itself has multiple mattresses, a straw tick as the base, then a feather mattress, possibly 2, then sheets of fine linen, possibly even silk if the lord is wealthy enough, then multiple blankets and fur coverlets. The inventory of one medieval noble's bed listed 3 mattresses, 5 blankets, 2 fur coverlets, and a canopy with curtains. That's the medieval equivalent of a luxury hotel room, and it was only for the very top of society. But even in the sola, with the canopy bed and the fireplace, it's still cold. The windows are shuttered, but wind gets through. The walls are still thick stone, still holding the cold. The floor is still freezing. The difference is that in the sola, you can actually get warm enough to sleep through the night most of the time. Down here in the hall, that's not guaranteed. You shift again, trying to redistribute your weight, and notice that your lower back is screaming at you. Medieval beds weren't designed for spinal support. The ropes sag, the mattresses compress unevenly, and you end up sleeping in a position that would make a chiropractor weep. By morning, everyone will emerge from their beds moving like elderly people, backs stiff, joints protesting. It'll take an hour of movement before you feel human again. There's a crash from somewhere in the darkness. Someone's knocked something over, probably while trying to navigate to the guardrobe. Muffled cursing follows, then silence. No one bothers getting up to help. If they're cursing, they're fine. The social dynamics of the hall at night are worth noting. You're sleeping surrounded by people of different ranks, but you're all equally cold, equally uncomfortable, equally vulnerable in sleep. There's something leveling about that, something that breaks down the usual hierarchies just slightly. In the morning, ranks will reassert themselves, but for now, in the dark, you're all just humans trying to survive the night. Some castles, particularly later medieval ones or ones that served as garrisons rather than noble residences, had separate barracks for knights and soldiers. These were communal sleeping rooms, slightly smaller than the Great Hall, sometimes with built-in bunks or sleeping platforms. Historians still debate whether these were warmer or colder than the hall. Smaller spaces should theoretically heat better, but they also often had fewer or smaller fireplaces. It probably depended on the specific castle and how well maintained it was. The castle you're in follows the older pattern. Everyone in the hall at night, spreading out according to rank, making do with what you have. It's crowded, it's noisy, it's cold, and it's absolutely normal for medieval life. This is how people lived for hundreds of years. How your father slept, how his father slept, stretching back generations. You wonder what people in the future will make of all this, assuming anyone bothers to write it down. Will they understand how normal this was? How you didn't think of it as hardship because it was just life? Or will they look back and pity you, sleeping on straw in stone buildings that couldn't keep out the cold? Probably both, you think. And then you stop thinking because sleep is creeping back, pulling you under, and there's no point fighting it. The routine of preparing for sleep in a medieval castle becomes ritualized after enough nights, each step as necessary as breathing. You've been through this hundreds of times, so many winters in so many castles, each one cold in its own particular way, and your body knows the sequence even when your mind is too tired to think clearly. First, you check the fire. Not your job, technically. That's the night watchman's responsibility. But you check anyway, because a fire that dies completely means everyone wakes up freezing, and restarting it from scratch in the middle of the night is miserable for everyone. The embers are still glowing, still radiating a little warmth. Good enough. Next, you secure your belongings. The Great Hall at night isn't exactly a high-security environment. People are generally honest, and theft is punished harshly enough that it's rare. But still, you don't leave your sword lying around where someone might trip over it in the dark. You don't abandon your good boots where they might accidentally get taken by someone with similar-sized feet and poor lighting. Everything gets tucked close to your bed, within arm's reach, where you can find it quickly if needed. Medieval people slept with the awareness that emergencies could happen. Fires, attacks, illnesses that turned critical in the night. You needed to be able to respond quickly. So you arranged things with that in mind. Weapons close, clothes accessible, nothing blocking your path to the door. It's not paranoia, it's practical thinking, developed over centuries of people learning the hard way. You check your bedding one more time, smoothing out the places where the sheets have bunched up, redistributing the blankets so they cover you evenly. The fur coverlet gets positioned just right, with the fur side down so it's against your body, the wool side up to protect it from the general griminess of castle life. This coverlet will probably last you another 10 years if you take care of it. Longer if you're lucky. Your cap is already on. You haven't taken it off since putting it on hours ago, but you adjust it, making sure it covers your ears completely. You've learned from experience that waking up with frost-nipped ears is both painful and embarrassing, and it affects your balance for days afterward. Not a good thing when you need to practice swordplay or ride a horse. The ritual extends to your position in bed. You've learned exactly how to arrange yourself to minimize the straw poking through, to avoid the worst of the lumps, to distribute your weight so the ropes don't dig into your back quite as badly. Left side first, knees slightly bent, right arm tucked under the blanket, left arm over it so you can pull the covers tighter if needed. It's a precise arrangement, developed through trial and error, and it makes the difference between sleeping poorly and not sleeping at all. Around you, others are going through their own rituals. Sir Geoffrey, he of the enviable fur coverlet, says a prayer before bed every night, audible enough that everyone near him has memorized it by now. One of the squires fidgets for exactly 5 minutes, shifting and rustling before finally settling down. The hunting dogs circle their spots 3 times before lying down, every single night, as if the floor might have changed since the previous night. These rituals matter more than you'd think. They create structure in the chaos of communal living, small islands of predictability in the randomness of medieval life. They're also practical. Each step serves a purpose, keeps you alive, keeps you warm, keeps you ready for whatever the night brings. Your grandfather taught you most of this, back when you were a page in his household. He'd been a knight for 40 years, had slept in dozens of castles, knew every trick for surviving winter nights. "The cold will kill you if you're stupid," he'd say, demonstrating how to wrap a heated stone, how to layer blankets, how to sleep in your clothes without waking up tangled and sweating. "But it'll just make you miserable if you're smart, and misery you can survive." He died in his sleep, actually, in this very castle, about 5 years ago. Heart gave out on a winter night, much like this one. They found him in the morning, still in his bed, peaceful. It was considered a good death, quick, painless, in his own bed rather than on a battlefield. You try not to think about that too much when you're lying here in the dark, trying to sleep. The thing about sleeping in these conditions is that you have to make peace with discomfort. You can't lie awake all night obsessing about the cold, the hard bed, the straw poking you, the sounds of 40 other people breathing and snoring and shifting. You have to accept it, let it become background noise. Focus on the small warmths, the heated stone at your feet, the fur against your skin, the blankets getting gradually warmer from your own body heat. It's almost meditative in a way. Lying very still, breathing slowly, letting your muscles relax one by one. Your toes first, then your feet, then your legs, working up through your body systematically. By the time you reach your head, you're usually drifting. Not quite asleep, but not quite awake either. In that fuzzy space where thoughts become dreams. The last thing you do, every night, is remind yourself that morning will come. It always does. The sun will rise, the cold will recede slightly, breakfast will be served in the hall, and you'll have duties to perform that will keep your body moving and warm. This night is temporary. The cold is temporary. You just have to make it through. And you will make it through. You've done it before. You'll do it again tomorrow night, and the night after, and every night until spring finally arrives, and you can sleep without shivering, without layers of wool, without wondering if your toes will still be attached in the morning. For now, though, you close your eyes, pull the blankets a little tighter, and surrender to whatever rest this night will bring. Dawn is still hours away. You can tell by the complete darkness outside the shuttered windows, by the depth of the cold that settles in the hours before sunrise, when even the stones seem to give up trying to hold any warmth. You're awake again, for the 3rd or maybe 4th time tonight, and your body is making it very clear that it's done with this whole sleeping on straw in a frozen castle situation. Everything hurts in that specific way that medieval sleeping arrangements cause. Your shoulder has a pressure point that's gone from uncomfortable to actively painful. Your hip feels bruised, which it probably is, from the relentless hardness of the surface beneath you. Your back is twisted in some configuration that seemed acceptable when you were falling asleep, but now feels like a profound mistake. And your feet, oh, your feet, have moved past cold into that numbness that's concerning, but also kind of a mercy, because at least you're not feeling the constant aching anymore. The heated stone is long gone, cold as everything else, just another lump under the sheets. You consider getting up to heat another one, but that would require leaving the cocoon of blankets you've spent hours warming with your body heat, walking across the freezing floor, disturbing the night watchman who's probably asleep anyway, and then coming back to a cold bed that you'd have to warm all over again. The cost-benefit analysis comes out firmly in favor of staying put and suffering through. You can hear in the darkness that at least 6 other people are awake. There's the sound of quiet conversation from near the fire, someone coughing, someone shifting in their bed with that particular frustrated energy of someone who's given up on comfort and is just waiting for morning. One of the dogs is whining softly, probably cold, probably wondering why humans insist on living in stone buildings instead of sensible dens dug into the earth. The question that keeps occurring to you in these long, dark hours is how people survived this for generation after generation. Not the nobility with their canopy beds and private chambers. You can understand how they managed. But the servants sleeping on straw with no sheets, the soldiers in the garrison who didn't even get to sleep in the hall, the villagers outside the castle walls, whose houses had maybe one room and definitely no fireplace. How did they not just freeze to death every winter? The answer, based on the historical records and accounts that historians still pore over, is that many of them did. Winter mortality rates were high, especially for the very young and the very old. Respiratory infections, pneumonia, complications from frostbite, these were common ways to die. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was genuinely dangerous. You survived it through a combination of adaptation, community warmth, and sheer stubborn refusal to die. Some historians argue that medieval people had higher metabolisms, that constant physical labor and different diets meant they generated more body heat than modern humans. Others point out that medieval life expectancy was much lower, and that might be partly because people were constantly stressed by temperature extremes. The debate continues, conducted in comfortable university offices with central heating, while you lie here experiencing the primary sources firsthand. There's movement at the door, the early guards changing shifts, letting in a blast of air that's somehow even colder than the air already in the hall. You hear someone curse, which is technically against the rules, but which everyone does anyway, because honestly, how can you not curse when opening a door in February feels like inviting in the physical embodiment of misery? The fire is being tended now, finally. The night watchman has either woken up or been woken up, and you hear the sound of logs being added, the rustle and crack as new fuel catches. The fire flares, sending dancing shadows across the walls, and you feel an incredibly distant suggestion of warmth, like someone mentioning warmth in a letter sent from a warmer climate. It's not reaching you, not really, but the knowledge that the fire is growing is psychologically comforting, if nothing else. You wonder what time it is. Probably about 3 or 4 hours before dawn, which is somehow both forever away and close enough to start considering just staying awake. You've gone without sleep before, guard duty, night watches, the occasional siege, and you can function on very little if you have to. But it's not ideal, and tomorrow promises to be physically demanding, and you really should try to sleep at least a little more. So you go through the ritual again, systematically relaxing your muscles, breathing slowly, trying to find a position that doesn't actively hurt. You pull the blankets up higher, tucking them around your neck, sealing in what body heat you have. You empty your mind of thoughts about the cold, about morning, about everything except the simple goal of becoming unconscious for a few more hours. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts drift. The discomfort recedes slightly, becoming something you're aware of, but not actively fighting. This is as close to comfort as you're going to get tonight. And medieval life has taught you that close enough counts when it comes to survival. Somewhere in the darkness, someone starts snoring again. The fire crackles and pops. The wind outside finds a new gap in the shutters and whistles through. A high, lonely sound that's been the soundtrack of winter nights since this castle was built. And you, wrapped in wool and fur and determination, drift back into that fragmented sleep that's the best a night can hope for on the coldest nights. Morning will come. It always does. You just have to survive until it does. And you will. You always have. The darkness is beginning to thin now, just barely, almost imperceptibly. But you've lived enough winters to recognize the quality of the blackness that means dawn is approaching, somewhere beyond these thick stone walls. You don't move yet. There's no reason to move. Not for another hour at least. And besides, your body has finally achieved something resembling equilibrium with the cold. Not warmth, never actual warmth, but that state where you're no longer actively fighting, where survival becomes automatic rather than effortful. Around you, the hall is quieting into that deep stillness that comes just before morning, when even the restless sleepers have exhausted themselves into submission, when the fire has burned down to coals again, but somehow it doesn't matter as much because dawn is coming, bringing with it the promise of movement and breakfast, and the chance to feel your fingers again. The stones beneath you are still hard, still cold, still pressing into your bones in ways that will make standing up an adventure in pain management. But you've made it through the night. That's the victory, small and unglamorous, but real. You survived another medieval winter night, and tomorrow night you'll do it again, and the night after that, until finally spring comes and renders all of this temporarily unnecessary. You let your breathing slow even further. Let your body sink deeper into the straw and feathers and wool. Let the weight of the fur coverlet feel less like protection and more like an embrace. The cold is still there, patient and eternal, but morning is coming faster, and soon you'll rise, stiff and sore, but alive, and join the others in the great hall as they shake off the night and prepare for another day in these ancient, impossible, stone-cold halls. For now, though, you simply rest and breathe and wait for dawn. Sleep well, traveller. Until next time.